it. But here we are, the end of 2023, in the 21st century, and what do we got? Well, no hovercrafts, no hoverboards, no hover cars, instead just the same old traffic jams. The best technology we've got when it comes to a computer producing your food is you do order it on a phone, and then somebody hops on a bike and rides it to you. And when it comes to hot days, like inevitably there will always be, because there's this thing called summer and this thing called winter. La Nina, El Nino means these things become a little more intense. Well, guess what happened today in New South Wales when things were particularly warm? Into the 21st century, people were being told not to use their dishwashers this afternoon because that power usage may well have ruined electricity for everyone. If you had an air conditioner, they told you not to turn it on either, and you had to wait till 9 o'clock before you could start to turn on your fan. Yeah, 21st century Australia, where the local energy minister says things like this.
There has been an indication from AEMO that this afternoon, between about 5 and 9 p.m, there's going to be some peak demand, and there are some concerns about the amount of reserve that we have. We're asking, households and businesses to think about what they can defer between 5 and 9 o'clock tonight. So if you can turn your air conditioning up a little bit, over about 24 is fantastic. If you can make sure that you don't use your dryers or your dishwashers or your pool pumps between sort of 5 and 9 p.m. tonight, that will all help. If you need to have your Christmas lights on, we'd really love that. If you need to have them on tonight between 5 and 9, if you don't need to, that's fine. Every small bit of action that we take will make it much easier to make sure that the grid stays on and there's not a problem. No one's forced to do any of this. We're just simply saying when you go home tonight, if you don't need to use your dryer or you don't need to put your dishwasher on until tomorrow morning, just please do that.
I mean, what a lovely temperature 24 degrees would be when it comes to your family trying to cool down after a day that was in the high 30s. Do you think any of that happened in the public service today? No, of course not. This is the absurdity of where we are, as green ideology means we've gone from an electricity system that works to one that doesn't work yet, and of course you're paying through the nose. Which brings us to another prediction of our future.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
But of course, just like those technology ones, they had their fingers crossed and it didn't really matter. But of course, it's not the first time that somebody's made a big promise and we're still yet to see it.
By 1990, no Australian child will be living in poverty.
Well, a similar promise that apparently goes into the same bucket as the special suit that'll cool you off or heat you up, the hoverboard or the Jetsons car, was of course that the cost of living was going to be coming down by now. You see, 18 months ago, Australians were asked to vote for a government that promised to do exactly that. A Labor government will lower the cost of living. Yet, as we know, every night, every week, every month we've talked about, every piece of information that tells us you are paying more by the day. Which brings us again to the reality for people who, at this time of year, are going to find it very difficult to have the Christmas they had last year or even the year before. Cost of living, of course, is a phenomenal problem for Australians. It's not a problem for the front end of the plane or the private jets that these people fly around in, including with their dogs, but it's national security, so we can't officially know. These people, that being politicians, they got their highest pay rise in 10 years this year, as did the public service. So, of course, they don't experience the same things that we do. And today, I'm sad to say that there is another example of how people are going to be hurting this Christmas who weren't hurting last Christmas. People who have jobs but are hurting this Christmas. The Herald Sun had a story today that 1 in 3 people are skipping meals to save money. Now, this comes from 2 bits of information, and one that particularly comes from an organisation called Second Bite. This is a group of people who try to take food that other people don't want and redistribute it to the people who desperately need it. The current cost of living crisis means Christmas will be a struggle for many Australians as parents and pet owners frequently skip meals to make ends meet, despite a staggering 7.6 billion kilos of food that we throw out every year. Now, I know there's Oz Harvest, but I want to focus in on Second Bite. This is, again, an organisation that is trying to take what other people would want to throw away and give it to the people who desperately need it. Second Bite, which is a national food rescue and redistribution charity, has conducted research, and it found that 90% of parents who use their service are skipping meals so their children don't go hungry. 85% of pet owners say they would rather not eat themselves so their pets can eat. And families are still to this day being forced to choose between food and medicines or rent or mortgage payments. More research that's been done on this shows that 48% of Australians skipped at least one meal due to economic hardship. That is the reality for too many people going into Christmas. Now, many of us will, of course, be looking forward to a very big day of family and a time where we spend lots of time around friends. And I know that I've told stories almost every week on this show about people who are doing it tough. But I'd like you to help us out, because tonight I want to try to show the places you can donate some money to tonight, or maybe your family could donate some money to in lieu of that extra present that is nice to open, but you don't really need it. If you'd like to help out Second Bite and what they are doing, you go to their website, secondbite, or one word, .org. Food Bank. Remember, they tell us that 3.7 million Australians have struggled to put food on the table this year. Their website is foodbank.org.au. We spoke to a great charity that is run out of Melbourne but has locations all over the country called Turbans for Australia. Now, these are people who are literally offering free food to people and they're lining up around the block. And then there's the people from Drought Angels that we spoke to a little bit earlier in the week. These were the people who lost about $250,000 worth of donations that had been given to them because somebody stole a truck. Now, very kindly, about $6,000 worth of donations came in after our interview last week, but I want to leave all these things up on the screen for you to write some names down. Now, you have been remarkable and so generous on everything that we've mentioned on the show that needs some help. So if you're tapped out, I get it. But to the person who maybe didn't help us out with Humpty Dumpty, maybe hasn't helped in other ways, and maybe is thinking of that present to give to the person who has already kind of got everything, we'll give a donation in their name to Second Bite, to Food Bank, to Turbans for Australia, or to Drought Angels. Give to one, give to all, but please support people who are taking care of the people that are really doing it tough, while the politicians pretend that they care, because they don't. Which brings us to the example of the Treasurer. Despite telling us for 363 days that the central focus of this government was about doing something on cost of living, all of those people are still going to suffer this Christmas. You see, the other 2 days were the days where the federal budget is released in May and then the mid-year economic statement is released at the end of the year. And it's all giggles because they've got an awful lot of taxation that's swirling around at the moment. And you see, it's great for the government because if the government's running a surplus, then they can go to an election saying, how good are we at managing the economy? An economy that, by the way, apparently has that many people who are struggling for food this Christmas. But the arrogance of these people thinking it's all about politics and all they need to appeal to is the Teal voters to keep not voting Liberal and the Greens' preferences, and even if their primary vote falls to even lower than the early 30s, they will win the next election. Well, I think humanity means an awful lot more than that, but still, the reviews are in, and a second surplus probably will be achieved by this government. Now, when I say achieved, come on, they haven't done anything. As I told you last night, the $10 billion worth of cuts that they were making to apparently help with inflation, most of it was delaying projects off into the never-never. Labor is on track to deliver its second surplus, thanks to, again, those changes when it comes to infrastructure cuts and higher personal income tax. Now, we had a conversation last night with Joe Hildebrand and Bronwyn Bishop, and so many people watched it around the country. Thank you for your support all the way through towards the early days of summer. I do appreciate it. About just how many people are paying tax. Well, I'll give you the tip. More people than ever before are paying tax, and the single greatest source of revenue to the Australian government is you. It's not company tax, it's not GST. According to the very numbers from the mid-year economic review, let's have a look here. The difference between what they suggested in May and what has been delivered now, the pay-as-you-go taxpayer, the average person, $336 billion. That is up $17 billion in just a few months. Company tax was $140 billion. That's up the best part of $8 billion. And if you think the GST is a huge source of money, of course, all of that ends up going to the state governments, but that is just $88 billion. It is just a fraction of the income tax that ends up funding the entire system. Remember, a system where 35% of the entire spending of the federal budget is on, among other things, actually not among other things, only on welfare. And just in case you would like to be reminded with some data of what we talked about last night, which is the trend. And yes, a bigger population equals more revenue for governments because more people end up getting jobs. But have a look at the overall taxation figure that has been put together over the past few years. In the last year of the Morrison government, it was $550 billion. First half of the shared year, half Morrison, half Labor, $618. This financial year, it's $649 billion, and we're not even halfway through. The expectations for the next year will be up again to $674 billion. And then in 2026-27, the federal government will be getting $716 billion. Now, if only we had examples of people who are currently running the system looking forward to more than $700 billion worth of taxation revenue, who were blowing a gasket when it was just $500 billion.
It is now the second highest taxing government in Australian recent history. The second highest taxing government in Australian political history.
The second highest taxing government in the last 30 years.
Our highest taxing government in modern Australian economic history.
Second highest taxing government of the last 30 years.
Well, guess who's now got the gold medal? The very people who told you vote for them and everything would be cheaper. It hasn't been. When it comes to paying off your house, anywhere from people with $500,000 loans all the way through to $1 million loans, it could be anywhere between an extra $15,000 to $30,000 a year in paying off your home. More people homeless than ever before in the country, despite, of course, the promises about kids and poverty back in the 1990s, let alone the cost of everything, particularly things when you go to get food, which now means that people are going to be lining up around the block this Christmas with no help from the federal government, no money extra sent from the surplus, no cracking off of $1 billion and sending it to the charity sector to make sure that those people who would rather feed their pets than feed themselves will get any assistance this Christmas. Yet, of course, because the extreme majority of people who talk about politics for a living desperately want to find a way to tell us that this government is bouncing back from its apparent near-death experience towards the end of the year. Nobody wants to hold these people accountable for the promises that they have made and the promises that they have not delivered. Your power is more expensive. Paying off your home is more expensive. Getting things from the supermarket is more expensive. Turning on the lights, if they work, depending on whether it's a hot day or not, is more expensive. And government is responsible for all of those settings. Welcome to the world of albonomics. Now, I can't pretend that there wasn't good news in terms of the number of people who have jobs, which of course means more tax, which means they get to become the highest taxing government of all time. In the past month, 57,000 people got a full-time job. That's good news. 4,500 people got a part-time job. But what that also means is an awful lot of people are now starting to look for work, which means the unemployment rate is at an 18-month high of 3.9%. The expectations in the mid-year economic review is that it'll have a 4 in front of it, and maybe another 110,000 people could end up losing their jobs. But, you know, whatever, little people. Who cares, right? Not these people. They've got puppies to fly on planes. National security.